Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are here to take a stack of source materials, articles, and research, and really just extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge, giving you a comprehensive shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And today we've got a scenario that it really forces us to confront a fundamental vulnerability in the structure of modern global civilization. It's a hypothetical, of course, but one with terrifyingly real consequences.
That's right. Our subject today is the total, complete erasure of a crop we rely on every single hour of every single day. So imagine this. Imagine waking up to a headline that feels just too unreal to believe. Wheat has gone extinct.
And that is the specific, precise scenario we're doing our deep dive on today. We are not talking about a temporary shortage because of a drought or, a localized bad harvest. I mean, total global extinction. It has gone from every farm, every seed bank, every climate, and every continent. It is simply, from a scientific standpoint, erased from the planetary ecosystem.
And the initial, the knee-jerk reaction from the average person, as our source material repeatedly points out, is often a dismissive shrug. The thought process is something like, it's just wheat. We still have rice, we have corn, we have potatoes, we'll be fine. Society will adjust.
That assumption is the very first thing that collapses. That initial shrug is founded on a profound misunderstanding of how deeply wheat is integrated into our food system, our economy, and even our culture. We treat it like a commodity, but in reality, it's the silent, ever-present backbone of civilization itself.
So that's our mission for you, the learner. Today, we're going to unpack the source material to trace the full cascading failures. We're going to move far beyond the basic idea of no bread to analyze the immediate food crisis, the hidden economic dependencies that start to unravel, and the inevitable societal breakdown that would follow the disappearance of the world's most important grain.
Get ready for a profound look. We're going to move across economics, nutrition, culture, even the environment, to really understand what happens when a cornerstone, one that's been 10,000 years in the making, is just suddenly ripped out from under the entire global infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this with the speed the crisis actually demands. We are starting right at the point of extinction, what our sources are calling the immediate shock. When this happens, it doesn't take weeks to manifest, right? It hits the shelves today.
That's the terrifying speed of it. I mean, think about the entire global food production system suddenly losing its foundational ingredient. The entire supply chain, from the largest mills to the smallest local bakeries, is just instantly paralyzed.
So the supermarket is the first place that you, the consumer, would feel the impact. Walk us through that, the instantaneous emptiness.
It's absolute. I mean, we're talking about staple foods that people just assume will always be there, and now they are chemically impossible to produce. That includes everything made from common flour. Every type of bread, every variety of pasta, all noodles, all the commercial flour itself.
Breakfast cereals, biscuits.
Breakfast cereals, biscuits, pastries, pizza dough, all tortillas and flatbreads, couscous, cakes, crackers. The list just goes on and on.
That's not just the bakery section. That's roughly half the average supermarket's inventory just gone. The visual shock of those empty shelves must be staggering.
It is, and you have to remember, wheat isn't monolithic. We rely on different varieties for different things, right? There's the high-protein, hard red winter wheat for leavened bread, the softer white wheat for cakes and biscuits, durum wheat specifically for pasta.
So when all types vanish, the vacuum is just universal.
Completely. And this sudden universal scarcity immediately triggers panic buying of all the remaining staples. Rice, corn, beans, which of course just makes the immediate shortages even worse and sends prices soaring instantly.
And the critical realization for those 8 billion people, most of whom have never experienced true scarcity, is that this isn't a temporary supply chain glitch. It's gone forever.
And that psychological shock transitions almost immediately into a physical nutritional crisis because of wheat's sheer global dominance.
Let's talk about that scale. What does the source material tell us about the sheer caloric loss?
That's where the numbers get truly devastating. Wheat is the single largest contributor to human nutrition globally. It provides a staggering 20% of the world's total calories.
20%?
Yeah. This is far, far greater than the contribution of many crops that feel more exotic or specialized.
1/5 of the entire global diet just erased. That is an almost incomprehensible amount of energy to lose overnight.
It is. And to put that into perspective, while rice is the primary staple in Asia and corn is dominant in the Americas for things like animal feed and industry, Wheat's distribution is truly global and generalized.
So it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. The instant loss means that, according to various analyses, 2.5 billion people, most of them in North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and parts of Europe, lose what they currently rely on as their primary daily food source.
And what does a 20% drop in available calories mean for global public health?
The onset of malnutrition is instantaneous, and it starts not just in the poorest nations, but even within wealthy, developed countries. People might have money in their pockets, but the calories are not physically available to buy. We're looking at immediate protein and complex carbohydrate deficits, especially in vulnerable populations like children and the elderly.
This connection to the listener is crucial, I think. Why does the extinction of wheat differ so radically from, say, the extinction of coffee or even beef?
Because wheat is the global, cheap, common denominator of calories. Coffee and beef, while they're economically important, they're largely optional. They're specialty products.
Right. Luxuries for many.
Exactly. Wheat is a foundation. When that foundation is removed, every class, every country, and every culture suffers an existential blow. Even if you primarily eat rice, your government, your infrastructure, your logistical systems, they are all stabilized by the fact that the other 20% of the world's calories are handled cheaply and efficiently by wheat production.
That efficiency brings us directly to the initial economic jolt. This isn't just a nutritional crisis, it's a financial apocalypse for several major global industries built entirely on that one grain.
This is the vanishing of a multi-trillion-dollar supply chain. When wheat stops trading, the ripple effects are immediate, they're complex, and they're highly disruptive to modern finance.
We often talk generally about economic collapse, but let's get specific. What are the mechanisms of the financial seizure that occurs in, say, the first 24 hours?
Well, you'd first see absolute panic in commodity markets. Major exchanges like the Chicago Board of Trade or the Winnipeg Commodity Exchange, which trade wheat futures, they would seize up entirely.
Because there's no future for wheat.
Exactly. These exchanges rely on the physical existence of the product. When the product is confirmed extinct, all those contracts become instantly worthless. This triggers a cascading wave of defaults across global derivatives markets.
So it's not just the price of flour going up, it's the systematic failure of the very instruments used to finance and ensure food production and distribution.
Precisely. Banks that loaned money based on expected harvests or grain inventory suddenly face mass write-downs. Governments panic as inflation spikes dramatically on all remaining food sources, and their primary agricultural exports vanish, which cripples their trade balances.
And what about the physical infrastructure? The silos, the ports?
Suddenly worthless. The specialized infrastructure silos, grain elevators, massive port facilities, dedicated railway lines, it all becomes financially worthless overnight, triggering widespread corporate bankruptcy within the transportation and storage sectors.
It sounds like a sudden, focused global depression centered entirely on agricultural infrastructure.
It's actually worse because it undermines the very foundation of sustained civilization. Wheat has been the cornerstone of settled human society for over 10,000 years. When you remove it, you're not just removing a product, you're ripping out the economic base upon which modern agriculture, infrastructure, and even land valuation were built.
And this would hit the big players the hardest, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. The crisis hits the major wheat giants: India, Russia, China, the US, Canada, Australia. These are countries whose political and economic stability are deeply intertwined with their capacity to produce and export this one grain. It's a historic crisis for them.
We've established the visible collapse, the empty shelves, and the immediate financial shock. Now let's move into the hidden dependencies, the parts of the crisis that creep up on you weeks later, causing this kind of industrial paralysis. This is the aha moment for the learner, I think, realizing where wheat is embedded beyond the obvious breadbasket.
This is where the depth of its industrial integration becomes genuinely alarming. Wheat isn't merely a foodstuff, it is a nearly perfect, cheap, and versatile industrial additive.
An additive.
Yes, it's used primarily for two things beyond dough. Its unique gluten proteins act as binders, and its starch is a fantastic thickening agent. Most consumers never, ever read the ingredient lists that reveal its presence.
So let's give the listener some concrete examples of wheat in disguise. Where are the truly surprising places this grain is hiding that cause this secondary industrial failure?
We're talking about the entire world of processed convenience, beyond the obvious thickening agents in thousands of sauces, soups, and ready-made meals. You find wheat in thousands of places you'd never expect.
Okay, give me a surprising example that would hit a huge population center.
Let's talk about soy sauce. Many traditional and industrial soy sauces rely on fermented wheat alongside soybeans. It's not just a filler, it provides complexity of flavor, body, and color.
Wow, I had no idea.
The global supply of soy sauce, a staple seasoning for literally half the world, is instantly compromised. It would require manufacturers to rapidly and fundamentally change ancient fermentation processes.
That is a staggering logistical problem for Asia alone. What about Western processed foods?
Oh, look at children's and specialized foods. Wheat-derived starches are used extensively in many baby foods for texture and caloric density. Similarly, many salad dressings and gravies rely on refined wheat flour or starches as stabilizers to prevent separation.
Okay, but what about something really unexpected?
Pet food. Most commercial pet foods for both dogs and cats use wheat as a primary carbohydrate binder and filler. Why? Because of its cheapness and its texture.
So if you own a dog or a cat, your ability to feed your pet is immediately compromised, even if you never touch a slice of bread yourself.
Exactly. And let's not forget beverages. While barley is often the primary grain, many beers, especially craft varieties like Hefeweizens, include wheat for head retention and flavor profile.
And the fast food industry must just collapse.
It's crippled. Think about coatings. The breading for chicken nuggets, fish fillets, onion rings. The specialized flour blends needed for that industrial coating process are gone overnight.
This means that every major food processing company on the planet is immediately thrown into industrial chaos, regardless of whether they actually make bread.
Absolutely. The crisis moves from a simple food shortage to a full-blown industrial paralysis. Companies are forced to reinvent literally thousands of products at the same time. This requires sourcing entirely new binders, flavor agents, and stabilizers.
And like potato starch or gums.
Right, things like potato starch, xanthan gum, or tapioca, all of which are now in incredibly high demand themselves, causing shortages and massive price spikes in those substitutes as well.
The resulting chaos must be an economic nightmare.
It is. You'd see massive shortages, costly product recalls because all the labeling is suddenly inaccurate, enormous financial losses across diverse sectors, and processing delays that could realistically last for years while the world tries to find stable, scalable replacements for these basic industrial functions.
It really is like stripping essential gear out of a machine. Everything connected to it just grinds to a halt.
That's a perfect analogy.
And moving beyond human and industrial consumption, this domino effect then slams right into our global protein supply. Let's talk about livestock and the secondary crisis that I think few would anticipate: the protein shortage.
This is a devastating second punch. Wheat is an energy-dense, cost-effective, and highly scalable ingredient in feed for almost all commercially farmed livestock and fish.
So when you remove that key feed component, what happens to the animals and the farmers who raise them?
The entire system destabilizes instantly. Commercial livestock operations, cows, chickens, goats, sheep, pigs, and industrial aquaculture, they all rely on these highly optimized feed blends.
And wheat was a huge part of that blend.
A significant portion, yes, for calories and roughage. Without it, feed prices just explode because farmers are now forced to compete directly with human food demand for the alternatives like corn, soy, and barley, which themselves are already strained.
Farmers can't just absorb that kind of cost increase.
No, they can't. They face immediate financial ruin. The only viable short-term economic strategy for them is to dramatically reduce their inventory. They're forced into mass, early slaughter of their animals, even if the animals aren't fully finished.
So you'd see this brief, chaotic glut of cheap meat hitting the market, and then nothing, a total collapse.
Precisely. That initial glut lasts only for a few weeks, and it's followed by a period where meat production virtually ceases. Meat prices then explode for the long term. Dairy products, milk, cheese, butter become incredibly scarce and expensive because of the cost of feeding the surviving dairy cattle.
And eggs.
Eggs, the traditional reliable source of cheap protein, become luxury items almost overnight.
So the nutritional crisis becomes this devastating dual problem.
Right.
We lose the easy, cheap plant calories from wheat, and then we simultaneously lose the animal protein and fats from the entire livestock economy that depended on that wheat in the first place.
Yes, and it creates a global protein deficit that is far, far harder to resolve than the initial calorie gap. Because rebuilding livestock populations takes years. Cattle take years to mature and reproduce. Even if we find new feed sources, the physical time required to restore the animal protein supply is immense, and that would drive mass malnutrition far quicker than many would anticipate.
When you combine that immediate existential food scarcity with this level of economic and industrial chaos, The historical record is pretty clear about the outcome. Our sources cite that chilling truth. Civilizations collapse faster from hunger than they do from warfare.
That is the tragic reality. When the basic social contract, the promise that people can feed themselves and their families, is broken on a planetary scale, the transition from an orderly society to chaos is frighteningly rapid.
And what does that rapid breakdown look like in major cities around the world?
It starts with localized unrest, fights around food distribution points. Crime rises exponentially because food is now the most valuable, non-renewable resource on the planet. We're talking about neighborhoods where people once left their doors unlocked, now seeing violent competition over a single bag of remaining grain.
And politically, this stress point immediately targets governments. They become the focus of all the anger.
Correct. Protests would erupt in every major city, initially demanding things like food rationing and price controls, but they would quickly morph into broader civil unrest against governments perceived as having failed to prevent the disaster or manage the subsequent famine.
And many of those governments, already unstable from the economic seizure, they'd just lose control.
They'd rapidly lose their ability to enforce order, yes.
And the inevitable result of resource scarcity on a geopolitical level is that borders close, right? Which would lead to the collapse of international food aid systems.
The humanitarian disaster is massive. Wealthy nations would immediately prioritize securing their own dwindling supplies, leading to massive export bans and a total stop to food aid for poorer nations.
And inside every country, the crisis just exposes those deep class divisions.
It does. The wealthy would secure supplies, often through illicit means or political connections, while the vast majority of the poor starve. This just highlights the inherent fragility of our globalized supply chains and proves that political systems, even stable democracies, are really ill-equipped to handle sudden, existential resource shock on a planetary scale.
Okay, so given the absolute scale of this disaster, the next logical question for the optimistic learner is, surely we can mobilize global science to fix this instantly. I mean, we can solve climate change, we can sequence the genome, we can bring back wheat, or at least engineer a substitute, right?
It's a natural leap to make, but in this specific scenario of total extinction, science faces immediate and insurmountable roadblocks. Let's detail the major scientific attempts and why they would fail to provide the immediate solution humanity so desperately needs.
Okay, starting with the most intuitive idea. Can't we just use advanced genetics to bring it back? Maybe using DNA preserved in some lab somewhere?
Unfortunately, no. The very definition of extinction in this scenario means no seeds, no viable tissue culture, and no usable genetic material remains anywhere on the planet. That includes ultra-secure facilities like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault.
So it's truly gone.
It's truly gone. You cannot genetically resurrect something that no longer exists in any physical form. That path is instantly sealed off.
Okay, so plan B. We turn to the existing caloric heavy hitters. Rice, barley, and corn. They're still here. Can they simply expand production to pick up the slack of 20% of the world's diet?
They cannot, and certainly not fast enough. The logistical challenges are enormous. While these crops provide calories, they have completely different growing requirements than wheat. For example, one of wheat's superpowers is that it's uniquely drought-resistant and thrives on marginal drier lands. Rice, on the other hand, requires massive water inputs and often specialized terracing or paddies.
So you can't just go out and plant rice on a former Kansas wheat field and expect the same result.
You absolutely cannot. The 218 million hectares of existing wheatland are not immediately suitable for maximum yield of replacement crops without massive, costly, and time-consuming infrastructural change, new irrigation, new machinery, retraining millions of farmers. Plus, the global supply chains for rice and corn are already maxed out serving their existing populations. They can't just absorb an extra 2.5 billion people's caloric needs instantly.
The sheer volume required is just too great, too fast.
Exactly.
And what about creating a replacement artificially? Can't we just synthesize a lab-made flour or some kind of starch substitute?
Technically, yes, we could synthesize nutrients or grow starches in a lab, perhaps from algae or specialized bacteria, but the process remains staggeringly expensive, and critically, it is far too slow to scale globally.
So it's not a real solution for the masses?
Not at all. Mass production of lab-grown food that matches the volume and affordability of wheat would require the construction of thousands of highly complex, energy-intensive factories. That would take years, even decades, to become operational. Lab production is a niche solution. It cannot replace global mass agriculture overnight.
On the longer-term solution, genetically engineering a completely new high-yield grain to replace wheat.
That is the ultimate goal. But it is a decades-long process. You must first breed the initial stable line, then test it for disease resistance against hundreds of potential blights, ensure it yields consistently across diverse climates worldwide, and confirm its genomic stability across generations.
And then you have all the regulatory hurdles.
Exactly. Getting a novel, engineered food source approved by every major government takes years of safety testing and political negotiation. Humanity faces a global famine risk now, not in 30 years. Science can offer hope for the distant future, but it offers zero solutions for the immediate crisis.
This realization of scientific impotence in the face of an existential agricultural crisis it's perhaps the most terrifying part of this whole scenario. And this leads us to the final profound loss in this section, the cultural wound.
This is the dimension of the crisis that often gets overlooked in the rush to calculate calories in economics. Wheat isn't just fuel, it's woven into the very fabric of human identity, religion, and daily rituals for millennia. When it vanishes, it leaves a profound, almost spiritual void.
Let's try to visualize that cultural devastation. What are the specific losses that would just erase traditions overnight?
Well, think about the symbolic meaning of bread. In Christianity, it is central to the Eucharist. In Judaism, the preparation of unleavened bread is critical to Passover. In so many cultures, the act of breaking bread is synonymous with peace and fellowship. All of that meaning just vanishes.
And the culinary erasure is total.
It's absolute. Imagine a world with absolutely no aish baladi or common flatbread in the Middle East, a culture that reveres bread as life itself. No pasta in Italy, erasing not just menus, but the entire social ritual of shared Sunday dinners.
No naan in India.
No naan, roti, or chapati in India and Pakistan, which are the caloric staples that accompany every single meal. No baguettes in France, destroying the iconic image of Parisian street life. Even staples in Asia, like ramen, udon, and specific types of dumplings are traditionally wheat-based.
And what about global celebration culture? It's crippled.
Every cake, every birthday pastry, every wedding tradition involving baked goods, every ritualistic food associated with holidays gone.
Yeah.
Entire culinary traditions from ancient Roman times to modern high-end cuisine are simply deleted from history, leaving a profound and possibly irreparable cultural wound across the entire planet.
We've hit the immediate shock, the industrial domino effect, and the societal fragmentation. Now we have to chart the grim timeline within months. The failure of the global wheat supply translates into full-scale famine, the largest modern history has ever seen.
That's the inevitable conclusion. The initial rush for alternative calories briefly stabilizes some markets, but that 20% caloric gap remains, and it widens as the substitutes themselves become scarce.
And food aid collapses.
Global food aid organizations, which rely heavily on donated grain, much of it wheat, they collapse or are just completely overwhelmed. Poor nations suffer first and most devastatingly, but the shock quickly propagates. Even nations like the US and the UK are forced to implement comprehensive food rationing as their own reserves dwindle and imports cease.
And the hardship isn't distributed evenly. Historically, where does famine hit hardest and why?
Urban centers are disproportionately hit. Rural populations often have diversified local food sources, maybe gardens or localized supply chains they can fall back on.
Right.
Urban areas, on the other hand, rely entirely on these complex, just-in-time supply chains fed by industrial agriculture. Once those chains are broken by the collapse of flour and feed production, cities become immediate catastrophic flashpoints of hunger and violence.
What specifically does that urban environment look like in this scenario?
It's total systemic failure. Restaurants close immediately and permanently. Bakeries vanish. Fast food chains, so heavily reliant on the efficiency and stability of wheat products, they collapse. Food deserts expand instantly, forcing millions to rely entirely on overwhelmed government rations and emergency distribution programs, which leads directly to the widespread social unrest we already discussed. The quality of life in any city degrades rapidly into a struggle for the basic necessities of survival.
And while this human tragedy is unfolding, we have a critical misconception to address about the environment. I think a lot of people would assume that 218 million hectares of land suddenly reverting to nature would be an ecological win.
That assumption is dangerously misleading. The scale of the abandoned fields, which is equivalent to the landmass of Mexico, is just too immense and too uniform for a quick recovery. When highly cultivated land that has relied on years of monoculture farming and chemical inputs is suddenly abandoned, it doesn't just instantly become a vibrant, diverse ecosystem.
So what is the reality of the environmental chaos that follows?
The environment suffers a massive short to medium-term shock. Heavy soil erosion begins almost immediately, especially in the dry plains where wheat is typically grown. Without the stabilizing wheat roots, the topsoil dries out, which leads to dramatic increases in dust storms, impacting air quality and public health far beyond the abandoned fields themselves.
And what grows in its place?
Invasive plants, often aggressive weeds that are designed to thrive on disturbed, chemically altered soil. They take over the land and actively destabilize the existing adjacent ecosystems.
And the final tragic irony of the environmental situation, the attempt to compensate for the loss.
Exactly. Desperate governments and farmers seeking to make up the inevitable calorie deficit must switch to less efficient crops like maize, potatoes, or cassava. Since these crops often require more water or different soil types, the farmers are forced to convert new land, often existing forests, savannas, or natural habitats, into farmland.
So the net result is that biodiversity suffers dramatically.
It does. Vast tracts of natural ecosystems are destroyed globally in an attempt to compensate for the efficiency loss caused by the weed extinction. Removing one cornerstone creates instability in every adjacent system, and that includes the natural world.
We have to confront the core, non-negotiable question now. Why can't humanity just substitute it? Why is wheat a once-in-a-civilization crop? What is that unique combination of characteristics that makes it truly irreplaceable?
It's the confluence of 6 essential traits, perfected by millennia of human selection, that no other single crop possesses at the same time. Wheat is the ultimate food system utility player.
Let's list those out, because this is the knowledge the learner needs to understand why this crisis is so existential.
Okay, first, drought resistance. Wheat can grow reliably on marginal lands with low rainfall, unlike rice or high-yield corn. Second, storage stability. Dried wheat kernels can be stored safely for years without complex processing or degradation.
That's a huge one.
It is. Third, high caloric density and productivity. It offers a massive caloric yield per acre and is highly efficient to harvest and process on an industrial scale.
And 2 that are crucial for a global staple.
Fourth, climate adaptability. Wheat grows across an enormous range of global climates, from Canada to Australia, which ensures its reliability. Fifth, nutritional and processing utility. It contains that unique gluten protein, which is what makes complex, leavened bread possible, a fundamental food technology.
And the last one is maybe the most important.
And finally, and crucially, affordability. Historically and logistically, it is cheap to produce, transport, and process, making it accessible to the global poor.
And you remove any single factor from that list, say you replace it with a high-calorie crop that can't be stored or one that can only be grown in specific tropical zones, and the crop becomes logistically untenable for feeding 2.5 billion people and stabilizing global trade.
You cannot replace wheat overnight, and realistically, you probably cannot replace wheat in 10 years. The world simply doesn't have a single, universal, cost-effective substitute ready to deploy at scale. We are looking at a permanent reduction in the global carrying capacity until a new system can somehow be built.
So faced with that brutal, inescapable reality, humanity is forced into a desperate, existential scramble. How does the world attempt to rebuild its food system from scratch?
This becomes the ultimate forced transition, and it's characterized by radical, often poorly planned solutions. Resources are immediately poured into developing artificial flour substitutes, attempting to use starches derived from high-yield root vegetables like cassava and potatoes, scaling up their farming in regions traditionally unsuitable for them.
And the protein gap needs radical solutions too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We'd see massive global investment in lab-grown proteins, often based on fungal or algae cultivation, and a rapid pivot to insect-based protein farming.
Insect farming.
Yes. It's uniquely fast and scalable, and it could cover the protein gap left by the livestock collapse. Simultaneously, you'd see an emergency transformation of global agriculture, often involving destructive land use changes, and a rapid, haphazard pivot to AI-optimized vertical farming for high-value crops.
Which means the transition is characterized by huge risks and massive painful failures.
Precisely. Some solutions might work, but slowly and painfully, requiring massive infrastructural investment and behavioral changes, like convincing billions of people to start eating insects. But inevitably, others would fail catastrophically. Maybe a new engineered crop succumbs to a novel blight, or a mass irrigation project causes an ecological collapse. The bottom line remains: the transition is brutal, and humanity is forced to rebuild its food systems from the ground up while simultaneously fighting global starvation and social collapse.
This deep dive has revealed the profound scope of the disaster caused by the extinction of just one simple seed. Let's synthesize those key takeaways for you, the listener, today.
We've traced the crisis from the immediate individual plate, the loss of 20% of global calories and the ensuing famine, all the way up to the systematic collapse of massive economic structures. We discussed the trillion-dollar derivatives market seizing up and the secondary devastation of the meat and dairy industries.
We saw how rapidly societal order breaks down, with urban centers becoming these flashpoints of unrest and governments losing control, all while science struggles with the decades-long process required to engineer any kind of sustainable fix.
And then the cultural identity of entire nations evaporates. And paradoxically, the environment destabilizes as farmers destroy existing ecosystems just to plant less efficient replacement crops.
The ultimate truth, reiterated across every piece of source material we examined, is this: wheat provided the stability and the efficiency that allowed the modern world to flourish. Its extinction wouldn't merely reset global economies, it would trigger an existential crisis, forcing humanity to fundamentally renegotiate its relationship with sustenance and survival.
And this whole scenario forces us to confront a truth we rarely acknowledge in the stability and convenience of our modern lives.
Which is?
Civilization is far more fragile than we care to admit.
It truly is. We build these towering economic and social structures, but they all rest on simple biological pillars that we so often take for granted.
And sometimes, the smallest, cheapest, most common seed can hold the entire complex world together. That's a powerful thought to contemplate as you think about the hidden, everyday dependencies in your own life.
Thank you for joining us for this in-depth exploration of the source material today. See you in the next video.